What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so we are officially into the second prelude for the War of Jokes and Riddles. And again, for those of you guys who are just joining us, the War of Jokes and Riddles is this upcoming story that everybody's really excited about from Batman. I'm really excited about it because this is a story that's basically going to cover like the Joker and the Riddler presumably fighting one another. But the whole idea is that the War of Jokes and Riddles comes out of Batman 0 Year. And of course, you'll find all the Batman stuff in the playlist down in the description as well as my main page. But to get you caught up a little bit, Batman 0 Year was basically DC's way of telling the new origin of Batman when the New 52 first launched down in 2011. And so the first story arc that we covered in the last video was Secret City, and it was basically just the origin of the Joker. But one of the things that I did is I'd actually left out a tail end of the story. And the reason why is because that tail end leads directly into this. So I kind of figured it would make more sense to kind of tack it into this video as opposed to the last video. But the whole idea was that in Secret City, Bruce Wayne was kind of stepping into his role as Batman. He was still discovering what he was capable of. He was still discovering how he needed to function accordingly, how to deal with criminals, so on and so forth. It wasn't until about halfway through that story that he actually donned the Batman costume and became the Cape Crusader that we all know and love. The issue with this is that eventually the conflict led him into a battle with a guy called the Red Hood, and ultimately resulted in the Red Hood falling into the Ace chemical vat. Now, the reason why this matters is because the Red Hood falling into the chemical vat at Ace Chemicals is kind of like this hallmark origin of the Killing Joke, really one of the definitive origins of the Joker, and the one that people cite the most often when they're talking about the Joker's origin. The idea, and one of the things we left out that I wanted to tack into this video, is following the events of this guy falling into, or the Red Hood falling into this chemical vat. Once they went through and tried to discover the body, there was no one there. And so this really seemed to hint towards the notion of the original Killing Joke origin, that the Joker, the guy who would become the Joker, fell into the vat, eventually escaped, and then was driven insane by his change in physical appearance, basically living up to the moniker from that original story, The Killing Joke. All it takes is one bad day. And so what ended up happening here is they actually discovered that there was a person who was originally the leader of the Red Hood gang, and this guy's name was Liam Distel. The problem with this was that while he was the original leader of the Red Hood gang, someone somewhere killed him, threw his body in lye, so no one could determine the time of death. And so they don't know if he was killed days, weeks, or months before the entire battle at Ace Chemical, meaning no one knows how long this person who became the Joker was leading the Red Hood gang. And so again, it was a really, really cool moment because it was kind of like this wrench that was thrown in there, and suddenly not everything is what it appears to be. And so again, it's a really cool moment, but the reason why I wanted to tack this into this video is because while, Batman and while, Alfred and so on and so forth, while they're all going through and they're basically kind of talking about the nature of Gotham City and they're talking about Batman's role using fear as a means to try to curb violence, the Riddler suddenly appears. Now again, the Riddler in the Secret City story was just a guy named Edward Nygma, and that was it. His involvement in terms of Gotham City was limited to the fact that he was more of an advisor to Philip Kane, the guy who took over as the head of Wayne Enterprises following the death of Bruce Wayne's parents, but before Bruce Wayne returned after all of his training in martial arts and all that kind of good stuff. And so the result was that following, basically Bruce Wayne taking, or I guess stepping back into his role as the head of Wayne Enterprises, Edward Nygma effectively vacated his position as advisor, and then this is the next time we see him when he becomes the Riddler. But this is kind of a cool moment because remember, when it comes to Edward Nygma, he usually has these schemes. Now sometimes they're small, sometimes they're huge, but before these schemes happen, he pitches out a riddle. And the idea is that if you can figure out what the answer to the riddle is, you'll save yourself or whoever it is that he's threatening to kill or bring harm to. In this instance, it's the city of Gotham. But what he does here is he brings out the riddle of the Sphinx. Now the riddle of the Sphinx is actually this really, really cool concept that dates, I think it's like the legend of Oedipus or something along those lines, where they supposedly set the Sphinx at the entrance to the city of Thebes. And the idea was that if you could answer the Sphinx's riddle, then you could in turn pass. But there were basically two riddles. The first riddle is really like the most popular of all the riddles that existed. Which creature has one voice and yet becomes 4-footed and 2-footed and then 3-footed? And the answer to that is basically a newborn baby, which basically can only just kind of utter words and then crawls around on 4 feet, which grows into a man, which walks around on 2 feet, which grows into an old man, and then walks around on 2 feet and then uses a cane. And so the second and the least known riddle is there are two sisters. One one gives birth to the other, and she in turn gives birth to the first. What are the two sisters? Now, we're basically given the answer to this, but here's the thing to keep in mind. While Bruce Wayne is kind of interjecting this little bit of information, the idea is that the Riddler is not really giving the answer to Gotham City. He simply says, here's your hint. The first sister says blank, and then the second sister says blank. And so again, the goal of Gotham is to figure out the answer to it. Now, the answer is day and night. Night gives birth to day, which gives birth to night again, which gives birth to day, and so on and so forth. Just a repeating cycle. But the idea is that the Riddler is basically taking up this role of effectively trying to make Gotham City smarter by culling away those that he considers to be less intelligent. Now, the other half of this is that with him taking down power to the city in its entirety, there's another character here that we haven't really talked about before. And this is a guy named Commissioner Loeb. Now, this is the guy who's basically running the show before Commissioner Gordon takes over that position. The issue with this is that Batman is still relatively new. Keep in mind, Batman's actions within the city of Gotham were effectively sanctioned by Commissioner Gordon, but only insofar that he was able to keep the police off the trail of Batman. At this point in the origin story, the two of them aren't really working together yet, and so Bruce Wayne does not trust Commissioner Gordon. In fact, we'll get to that here in a little bit, but the idea is that the police force, for the most part, are turning very much against Batman. So it's really a lot of what you saw if you watched Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, in the sense that Batman first shows up and none of the cops trust him. Because this is Scott Snyder's Batman, it's not designed to be linear. I mean, it is to a degree, but it's not designed to be one of these stories where this happens and that happens and that happens and that happens and then we're done. Instead, Scott Snyder really interweaves a lot of different things together, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to go back and just kind of redo the whole New 52 Batman run, which again, you'll find that down in the playlist. But the idea here is that with Scott Snyder kind of interweaving all these different themes, what we actually do is we pick up with this case where people's bones are just growing uncontrollably. And initially it seems like it has nothing to do with anything. But again, there's a lot of small cameos that take place here. For example, Pamela Isley, the woman that will later become Poison Ivy. Of course, she basically points to the idea that she doesn't know exactly what it is that went on here, but what she did do is witness a guy that had basically been sneaking in and out who looked all skeletal, and so it seems like they're kind of pointing the finger that this guy is the one responsible. But again, this whole notion of Bruce Wayne trying to deal with two things at the same time, the idea that Gotham City is descending into absolute madness in the absence of the police who are trying to track down Batman and not dealing with regular crime, as well as this idea that someone's going around and just causing all these bodies or these bones to mutilate to the point where they destroy people from the inside out. This coincides with him meeting with Commissioner Gordon. Now again, this is really one of the only times, or one of the first few times, the two of them actually meet head to head, and it's really just Bruce Wayne saying he does not trust Commissioner Gordon. Now, this is something that's just kind of hinted at. This is really done in like 3 phases. The first phase is this encounter. The second phase is an encounter in a hospital, and the third phase is when Commissioner Gordon rescues Batman and basically spills his side of the story. And that's why this is so cool, is because it's all these different themes that are kind of intertwined and they come together to create this amazing story. But the idea is that Commissioner Gordon just kind of shows up on the grounds of Wayne Manor, not because he knows that Bruce Wayne is Batman, but because he just kind of, is looking at Bruce Wayne's return to Gotham City and the hope that Bruce Wayne's been espousing in terms of turning Gotham City around and making it a better place to live. The result of this is that where Commissioner Gordon initially begins to sneak around with the idea that maybe the Batcave's down there or something like that, not really knowing what he's looking for, Bruce Wayne uses a few ruses here and there and basically says, we were just trying to get rid of bats, whatever, and runs Commissioner Gordon out of there. Now, at this point, we switch over to Lucius Fox, and this is actually a stark difference from the Lucius Fox before the New 52. Lucius Fox originally appeared back in Batman number 307 in 1979, so he appeared before Crisis on Infinite Earths. But the idea here was that Lucius Fox's original employment by Bruce Wayne came by way of Bruce himself, in the sense that they had basically met one another, and then Lucius Fox was put in charge of what would become the Wayne Foundation. With this New 52 run, what basically happens is this is brought closer in line with the Dark Knight trilogy, which makes sense, because when people go see a Batman movie and they're intrigued and they love it, there has to be some measure of relatability. You have to walk this fine line. The comics have to be different enough that people aren't basically reading a carbon copy of what they saw in the movies, but they have to be similar enough that they can recognize characters and not feel totally removed or unable to understand what it is that's going on. And so the idea here is we're basically told about a guy named Helfern. Now, with regards to Lucius Fox here, he was basically brought on by Bruce Wayne's father, and so that's why he's really employed here. So it's very much tied into the Christopher Nolan origin for Lucius Fox himself. But the goal here, or at least the explanation that's offered by Lucius, is that this guy Helfern was basically working on this sort of nanomedicine in the sense that he could basically modify the, organic structure of bones more or less, or the molecular structure of bones, so that if somebody were to knock you off of a building, you'd go falling down, and the moment you hit, your bones would solidify to the point that your brain would be preserved, your bones wouldn't break, and you would basically be fine. Now, of course, that raises the question, what would happen if your brain like bounced off your skull, or if your stomach bounced off your rib cage and just shattered, just got ripped all to pieces? The long and short of it is that this would have been revolutionary technology, because then you could start sending soldiers into the battlefield without fear of having their bones break in the middle of skirmishes and different things like that, and this would even pave the way for things like bulletproof skin. The issue with this is that Lucius Fox seems to effectively turn against Bruce Wayne when he makes the case that finding any measure of escape from Healthburn, who's basically being called Dr. Death now, is essentially impossible. And so again, it's really kind of this cool notion, because it seems as though Lucius Fox was either turned or something along those lines, only for us to find out that, with Lucius Fox basically being attacked by Healthburn, with, Lucius Fox declaring the name Bruce Wayne, only for Healthburn to learn that Bruce Wayne is here, which puts him in a position where he can basically ransom Bruce, or at the very least, force Bruce to basically continue funding his technology or whatever it is. We end up finding out that with Healthburn being temporarily incapacitated by Bruce and allowing himself and Lucius Fox to get away, that Lucius basically injected him with this sort of basic, cure for this illness, effectively. Now, this leads directly into the second encounter with Bruce Wayne and Commissioner Gordon. And the reason why is because of the fact that while Bruce and Lucius are trying to make their escape, Healthburn returns again, only for Commissioner Gordon to step in, fire a couple shots, and run Healthburn off. And so with regards to Bruce and Commissioner Gordon's encounter, this is one of the reasons why Snyder's run of Batman was so cool, because it was really more about the characters than it was about the story. And what we end up finding out here was that when Bruce Wayne was a little kid, prior to the death of his parents, really the day his parents died, he had gone for a ride-along with Commissioner Gordon. And the idea was that Gordon had basically taken him around to the various parts of Gotham, basically saying, this is our location, this is our spot, this is where we do, our whole thing, and monitor the streets and so on and so forth, keep the things safe. But what ends up happening here is basically one of his guys, an officer by the name of Dan, really his partner, ends up going into, a particular location, and then comes out with this extremely nice looking, jacket of sorts, this overcoat. And of course, Bruce makes reference to it and asks, where did you get this? Now, at the time, the explanation that was offered by Commissioner Gordon is, well, the citizens of Gotham give this to us because they love us so much. But what this does is it basically tells Bruce, or at least as he came to realize when he got older, it was effectively a payoff. It was basically bribery, is really all it was. Instead of cash, it was a super nice coat, just a way of saying, hey, look, you look that way, we'll do our thing here, and you'll get some kind of a gift in return. The result is that Bruce Wayne had continually harbored these feelings that Gotham City's police department and Commissioner Gordon were inherently corrupt. And so again, grabbing Commissioner Gordon's gun, pointing it at his face, he basically reiterates the feelings that he felt when his parents were killed, and saying, look, because of Gotham City's police force, because of their incompetence, because of their negligence, because of the fact that they were so crooked, Bruce Wayne's parents were killed. And that's why Bruce does not like the police department, because he views the death of his parents as the failing of the police department. And so the result of this is that with Bruce going out and basically, traveling to one of these little areas, basically one of these little satellite places where Healthburn was supposedly working out of, along with a few more of his colleagues, Commissioner Gordon also gets this little bit of a letter from Edward Nygma. Now, of course, this coincides with the arrival of Commissioner Loeb. And remember, like we said, Commissioner Loeb is kind of leading this charge against Batman, basically saying, look, this guy's a vigilante, this guy doesn't stand for justice, this guy's effectively a villain, we've got to take him out. And so what ensues here is really Batman in one of his earliest days finding difficulty coping with this situation. And that's one of the reasons why these stories are so cool, is because in the modern day, if Batman were to face off against the cops, it really wouldn't be that difficult, because of his experience and all of his training really kind of comes together, and it would allow him to incapacitate the cops quite readily. At this point in his career, he's basically walking a tightrope, because he doesn't have the experience necessary to understand how to incapacitate the police while simultaneously no one being aware of the fact that he's there. Now, the other half of this is that Commissioner Loeb and company were basically tipped off to the arrival of Batman. Now, of course, this isn't initially given to us. Instead, he really just kind of dances around him a little bit. He's fired at, he's, shot a few times, more or less injured. And of course, he manages to make his escape, only to be rescued by Commissioner Gordon. So again, this comes into the third part of Commissioner Gordon and Bruce Wayne meeting one another. Now, of course, Commissioner Gordon basically says, hey, look, the Riddler sent out information to everybody saying what you were capable of and where you would most likely go. And that's the reason why Commissioner Loeb and everybody were so ready for him, is because they basically knew exactly what he was going to do, how he would react. Now, the other half of this is basically Commissioner Gordon's side of the story with regards to Bruce Wayne's claims of corruption. And what we end up finding out here is that Commissioner Gordon was basically 3 weeks in Gotham City when he went on that ride along with Bruce Wayne. And for the most part, when he was at this point in his career, having come out of Chicago, where Chicago was an extremely extremely dark and violent place, Commissioner Gordon wanted to believe that Gotham would be a much better and a much cleaner place. The problem with this was that Commissioner Gordon had this sort of feeling under his gut that there was basically a lot of corruption taking place in Gotham. But coming out of where he was before, looking out for his daughter, looking out for his son, he didn't want to believe it was true. The issue with this was that when he had given the explanation to Bruce Wayne that, oh, well, the citizens of Gotham absolutely love us, when he saw the hope in Bruce Wayne's face, it shattered the illusion. And so what ended up happening here is he actually ended up going out to, where he got this jacket from, only to find out that his own partner, alongside a multitude of other police officers, as well as Commissioner Loeb, were all basically engaging in these back alley dogfighting rings, different things like that. They were all on the take. They were engaged in bribery. I mean, virtually every illicit act that police can be engaged in, they were engaged in. Now, of course, this leads to things like, if they all got busted, it would lead to like RICO charges. I mean, it'd be absolutely insane. But the idea here is that Commissioner Gordon basically says, I went back and I walked my beat. These dogs were sicked on me. These dogs attacked me. I had to defend myself. I ended up killing him. The entire time, it turns out his partner bet on Jim Gordon to win. So even then, they were just betting on whether or not Jim Gordon lives, which, helped Jim Gordon to realize that in the face of the Gotham Police Department, it's so corrupt, it's totally irrelevant if a cop lives and dies. And so again, because of that whole thing, he basically spills his story to Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne, in turn, bails out before the story's finished, or at least it seems to be that way. Now, of course, this is really kind of the early stages of the whole idea where Commissioner Gordon is talking to Batman, and Batman just vanishes all of a sudden. But one thing to keep in mind is that Jim Gordon still does not know that Bruce Wayne is Batman. To him, they're two distinctly different people. But the return of Bruce Wayne forced Commissioner Gordon to go back and recall all these old memories that he had of Bruce, and effectively, ask himself these serious questions. Is he going to be a guy that stands alongside and watches these cops just become corrupt? Or is he going to be a guy that steps out and actually does something? Now, of course, this leads into the whole idea of the Riddler's main scheme. And again, this is why we kind of call this the origin of the Riddler, is because this focuses on the Riddler's nature, in the sense that, remember, like we said at the beginning of the video, when the Riddler goes into these schemes, big or small, you're met with a riddle. If you fail to answer it in time, then you have to pay the price. And so the idea here is that Batman basically comes to the realization that the whole efforts of Hepburn basically going around and attacking, killing these former colleagues of his, it was not arbitrary. It was not a goal of revenge. It was not him just being angry at those who rejected him. Instead, he's effectively working for the Riddler. And the reason why is because of the fact that the Riddler basically intends to seize control of Gotham when power's brought back up. He has effectively tapped into the core of the city itself. And so what would end up happening here is that when the power is taken down, it would result in Gotham Light and Power, so on and so forth, these various agencies bringing it back up. At the moment that happens, they bring it up under Edward Nygma's control. And so what ends up happening here is that the entire city of Gotham is basically met with a hurricane. Now again, this hurricane wasn't like a freak thing. No. What ended up happening is that this hurricane was on its way, and Gotham was actually prepping for it, which is one of the reasons why Edward Nygma chose this particular scenario. Because of course, with Batman basically descending on what he believes to be Edward Nygma's main base of operations, this giant weather balloon, Batman's realization comes with the fact that he can basically disrupt the signal. Now again, this is the idea that with Gotham Power and Light effectively bringing power back up to the city, the Riddler's gonna have to send some kind of a signal out, which in turn, Batman can basically interrupt and essentially call it a day. And so of course, leaping to this massive thing, one of the things that I want to point out here is that there is a panel that's basically a direct homage to The Dark Knight Returns, and it just looks really cool the way that it's done. It's the small little things like this that really made Scott Snyder's run really enjoyable. But of course, this leads to Batman basically running back into Hepburn again. Now, of course, this coincides with Commissioner Gordon also tracking down Edward Nygma. And the funny thing about this is that Edward Nygma brings up what's called the Archimedes principle. Now, the Archimedes principle is this crazy thing in physics. Even I don't fully understand it. The overall idea here is that this is kind of like a modified version of the Archimedes principle in terms of like buoyancy versus an object. Like if you stick your hand in water, the further you stick your hand down, the more pressure you feel on your hand. But the idea is that this is really just kind of Edward Nygma being more Riddlery, I guess, if that's a word. But the fact remains here that again, this ultimately results in Hepburn kind of telling his story. And what we find out here is that he hails from a family that had largely been involved in different wartime conflicts going as far back as World War II. The problem with this is that this psychological break that happened with him came in multiple stages. The first was really like the death of his son in the Middle East. The second was being fired from his job at Wayne Enterprises because his views on nanomedicine were so extreme. And the third was basically coming to the realization that there seemed to be no way for him to be able to achieve his goal because he was fired from Wayne Enterprises. Now, this led to the Riddler engaging in actions that would basically help Hepburn by funding his research, so on and so forth. But again, all of this is because of the fact that Edward Nygma was trying to achieve his own goal. Now, with regards to Hepburn, for the most part, while Batman tries to reason with him and say, hey, look, you're being used by the Riddler, Healthburn doesn't really care. The end result is that even if he dies, his research will be studied and cataloged, and his legacy will live on. This is one of the reasons why his character is so dramatic and why his character is kind of crazy out there, is because it's not necessarily about what a man can achieve in his lifetime, it's about what a man can do that will live beyond his own death into the future of humanity. And so what ends up happening here is that in this skirmish between the two of them, Batman comes to the realization that Healthburn's limbs basically continue to grow and expand in response to trauma, meaning that if he can basically go through and start breaking off bones, then his bones will just start growing, and essentially replace them. Now the problem with this is that the formula is basically broken and it's not perfect. What would happen if the formula was perfect is Batman would come along and he would break his femur bone, for example. He'd just kick him in the thigh really hard and break his femur, and the bone would heal perfectly. With this imperfect formula, Batman would break off a piece of the bone and then all the bones in the body would just start regrowing. And so again, there's no rhyme or reason to why it happens. The issue with this is that it basically causes the bones within the body of Healthburn to start growing uncontrollably. And this results in Batman both destroying this, weather balloon basically, as well as Healthburn's skull growing to the point where it actually just crushes his brain. But Dark City basically comes to a close when the power is brought back up and all they see is just a Riddler question mark, which of course means that the Riddler now has control of the city. Detonating this trigger, more or less, he ends up detonating all these safety walls around the city of Gotham, which basically allows water to just come pouring in and effectively begin the process of drowning almost everybody in Gotham proper. So again, this is why I say the New 52 Riddler was so cool and so interesting, because for the most part, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on the Riddler before the New 52, but I don't really recall his schemes being as big and grandiose as this. But it's still a pretty cool thing to see him basically trying to destroy the entire city of Gotham, and only those smart enough to either seek safety or those smart enough to figure out the riddle would ultimately be the ones who would find some measure of help and survive to see the next day. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. What is today? Tuesday? Next Tuesday is going to be Savage City, which brings a conclusion to the Batman Zero Year story arc, and that will effectively let us just kind of wait until the War of Jokes and Riddles finishes. But I'll go ahead and throw this video down in the playlist so you guys can stay up to date on everything that's going on, and I will catch you all later. Peace.